What's up guys, JC Sens here in Las Vegas. You are either watching right now or have just finished watching or are about to watch the AMD keynote about RDNA 3 graphics. So we got a lot of anticipation here, a lot of stuff to kind of talk about and digest. Man, where to begin? I'm not even entirely too sure yet. But first, let's get paid and then we'll talk about it.
We interrupt this video to bring you a special message from iFixit. No, we interrupt this interruption with this interruption about new stuff from iFixit. Wish you had a new graphics card, but inventory sucks? Fix the inventory problems with iFixit. Whoa, don't drop it. Can't fix that with iFixit. Just kidding, yes you can. Wish you could take iFixit with you anywhere, but your pockets aren't big enough? Introducing the new Moray
and the new Minnow.
Take them with you anywhere. So get iFixit for your loved ones, or just get them for yourself.
So this is probably one of the most anticipated launches of the year, quite honestly. And it's not because of the fact that how good it's expected to be. It's just because of how bad things have kind of been going for the other brand. Of course, we're talking about NVIDIA there. The RDNA 3 technology, or the third generation RDNA graphics, so we had the 5700 XT, and then we had the 6900, and then 6950 XT, and then now we have a 7900 XTX, and a 7900 XT. I love how the naming convention, by the way, is really starting to go back towards the roots of Radeon. The RX 7900 XTX. The two SKUs that we're going to talk about based on RDNA 3 technology. Let's just talk about first the base level specs, because I know the average consumer just kind of wants base level specs. We'll talk about some of the stuff that makes this launch so much more unique than it just being a new graphics card that's either a smaller process and a bigger die and more horsepower. So the 7900 XTX has 24 gigabytes of GDDR6, which is kind of like the standard now, right? I mean, NVIDIA's 4090 and 3090 both had 24 gigabytes of GDDR6. But the 7900 XT has 20 gigabytes of GDDR6. So already right off the bat, both of those cards are gonna be fantastic for high resolution gaming, 4K gaming. There's a lot of discussion of 8K. And that's not necessarily because they are saying 8K gaming is being adopted. It's just, that's the next 4K in the sense of how hard is it to run? Because 4K is really becoming easy to run these days for the graphics cards, especially when you have FSR 2.0 and then you have DLSS 3. And by the way, FSR 3.0 coming out in the first half of 2023, so that's exciting. We'll talk about the uplift there in a second. So it's a 5 nanometer compute die. So the compute die, or the actual GPU portion of it, is a fully fleshed out 5 nanometer process. However, the memcache dies, or this is what's based on the chiplet design now, is a 6 nanometer, again, fully matured 6 nanometer cache die. That gives you 61 teraflops of compute. 61 teraflops. Now, a lot of the ways that they're accomplishing this is because of the, 58 billion transistors in their 300 millimeter squared GCD, but because of the fact that they have 6 nanometer MCDs and 6 of them, creating an infinity cache that is much faster than going out to the graphics, the VRAM. Now they've reached a point where by taking what they've learned with developing the Ryzen CPU and having an infinity cache there, the more compute that can take place natively on the die is always going to be faster than going anywhere else through the substrate or the architecture. So by now having up to 96 megabytes available of cache to the GCD means a very fast communication there without having to go out to the GDDR6. Everyone knows the smaller process is a more efficient process. So one of the big focuses here regarding RDNA 3 is power efficiency. 54% performance per watt improvement over RDNA 2. Which was already extremely efficient. So the 7900 XTX has a 355 watt TDP utilizing 2 8-pin PCI Express power connectors, standard power connectors. In terms of the size as well, it's fairly standard. It's a 2.5 slot card, and it is a little bit taller than average. But the bottom line is it will fit in just about any chassis, even small form factor. So it's already looking like a benefit for many people to be able to not have to use any sort of a power adapter or not have to buy another plug or a new power supply to try and work around the power adapter. You don't have to basically jackhammer out your case to be able to fit the graphics card in there. It's kind of insane what they were able to accomplish there. Now ray tracing, it's interesting because of the fact that this is their 2nd gen RT core, and if you're into ray tracing, it's going to be a hard sell to convince, I think, people to go with AMD over NVIDIA, because NVIDIA is on their 3rd gen RT core. But now when it comes to performance too, the 7900 XT is just a little bit kind of shaved down version of the 7900 XTX. I think it's weird that they chose XT versus XTX rather than saying 7900 and 7950. Makes me wonder, is there a 7950 coming out later? I just think the XTX and XT is a really kind of an homage to the original Radeon days of when it was like ATI. Both cards feature DisplayPort 2.1. That's big because DisplayPort 1.4 has been the standard for a long time, but 2.1 gives you a massive forward-facing future-proofing when it comes to new panels coming out in the future here, which will allow for 165 hertz 8K or 480 hertz 4K. Now, it's very difficult to find a game these days that is actually going to run that kind of FPS at that sort of resolution. However, this is how you end up achieving those frame rates in the future, is because you have the standard and the spec that gets adopted, and as over the next few generations of graphics cards, seeing 480 FPS and AAA titles in 4K will be very realistic. We all said the same thing about 1080 when 1080 was new. We said that about 1440 when it was new. It's like, those resolutions will never hit high FPS. Well, that's completely, and I'm sorry about the noise, guys. It's, we're in a hotel lobby here. There's so much going on. But that's all achievable because of the 54 gigabit transfer rate of the cable, or the spec of this 2.1 DisplayPort. But it also natively supports 12-bit color. Where I was looking at this going is the fact that this would make an amazing 8K HTPC theater if you were having 8K projector. 8K projectors in home theaters and stuff exist, and you're not going to be able to get that sort of Blu-ray performance because Blu-ray's not there yet, so you'd have to use like an HTPC. 8K 165, that's really just a spec flex. I take that back, actually. They did show some 8K titles that were achieving 130, 140 FPS with the 7900 XTX using FSR 3.0. We didn't get a whole deep dive on how FSR 3.0 works. That's coming later in 2023, but that's one of the things that makes some of these really high FPS 8K 165 hertz stuff even possible. So now in frequencies, it's interesting because they have different frequencies for different tasks and different operations, which is part of the efficiency design. Rather than just going, okay, everything goes to this clock speed under this workload and everything's kind of going balls to the wall, but the load is low, and that's not very power efficient. So they have a 2.3 gigahertz shader clock speed, which is 25% more efficient than RDNA 2. Well, at 2.3 gigahertz, it's 25% more efficient than it was at RDNA 2 at the same frequency. They have a 2.5 gigahertz front-end clock speed, which is 15% higher than RDNA 2. Now, these numbers are always weird because of the fact that you know that the clocks do auto and dynamically boost based on workload and temperatures and overhead and power limit and all that sort of stuff. So more than likely, you'll see these clocks be higher than that no matter what. But what I find kind of interesting is the fact that the clock speed bump is fairly modest versus if we kind of compare, like, again, I don't want to compare AMD and NVIDIA on the clock speed level. I say this all the time, that clock speeds are not directly comparable between NVIDIA's architecture and especially this chiplet architecture. But there was a significant clock speed bump on 40 series for NVIDIA versus 30 series. I mean, 2.8 gigahertz auto boosting out of the box on pretty much just about, well, 2.7 to 2.8 out of every card. We saw those types of frequencies, 2.6 to 2.7, easily happening on AMD's RDNA 2, but again, that was because of the dynamic clock speeds happening here. But I think because we have 58 billion transistors in this 300 millimeter squared die, this GCD, I think there had to be a little bit of a trade-off where there was a massive transistor boost count increase with a modest clock speed increase. And that's, again, because efficiency was very important this time around. I mean, 355 watts. Sure as heck looks a lot better than 450 plus watts of melting connectors. Let's talk about the elephant in the room, and you guys have probably already noticed. There was absolutely zero comparison in any sort of game, not just versus NVIDIA. There was a couple of mentions of like performance uplift versus RDNA 2 in terms of like, you know, up to 1.7 times faster or 2 times. So basically, it's a 2 times instructions per clock increase. And that's specifically attributed to the 6 nanometer MCD or memory core or memory cache die design, chiplet design versus the GCD, the 300 millimeter squared GCD design. So the chiplet design is what they're attributing that 2x performance uplift in terms of IPC. Now they did compare it to the 6000 series in a couple of slides here in terms of both efficiency and then just overall performance uplift. But there was zero comparison whatsoever in relative performance to anything from the competition. And I kind of expected there to be because of the fact that the 4090 has been out for a month now. If you're AMD, you know you're going to immediately start testing your product against it. So this non-mentioning of the performance versus NVIDIA, that's where things are really looking. I know it sounds like a fart. I swear it's not. It's tape over there. I'm not farting, guys, I swear. Anyway, that's But it definitely leaves, I think, a lot of questions for gamers. Okay, the price. 7800 XTX available December 13th for $999. And then 7800 XT, 20 gigabyte, also December 13th for $899. The 7800 XTX is a minimum $600 cheaper than a 4090. Remember, the cheapest 4090 is the Founders Edition, and everything's up from there. So if we extrapolate any sort of performance figures from the price, which I don't think, that would mean that it's 60% of the performance of an RTX 4090, so they're just gonna price it 60% less expensive. I don't think that's true. I think there's a drill that's going over there now. I think there's a market share move here to let's maybe cut into our profit a little bit to bring the price down to make it more incentivizing. Because the missing information here is if it's as good as they're saying and it's priced where it is, wouldn't you want to say, oh, and by the way, it's just as fast as the other guy at this price? So I don't know. I have to assume that this is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of a 4090. Maybe they're waiting to compare it to a 4080. I don't know. So does them not showing any sort of performance metric versus NVIDIA a move of uncertainty? Is it them maybe taking the high road? Because one of the things AMD's always done in the past, especially with old marketing when like Roy Taylor was around and stuff, was the problem of like our marketing is about putting down the other guy, not about standing on our own legs and our own products. AMD's model has changed from that a long time ago. And I feel like it's literally just, here's our product, we're putting it out there. And maybe comparing it to the other guy looks like you don't want the other guy to be the benchmark you're against, because that sort of beefs up the other guy. So I don't know, I'm really confused by the fact that there's no performance metrics against anything through NVIDIA, which means you're just gonna have to watch our reviews when we start reviewing the products. So I'm cautiously optimistic about this, but I'm gonna tell you right now, as I have already stated, a 7950X CPU will be my next CPU for the next rig I build that's gonna replace my 10th gen at home. The 12th gen rig never made it home because I still have nothing but weird issues with 12th gen at my studio, and I just can't bring that home. I'm not happy with it. The CPU, that's settled. The GPU, I need to see how this performs. If it's anywhere in the ballpark of a 4090, but it doesn't require the stupid cable adapters and it's not this gigantic thing, which obviously it's not based on the reference design, it is very likely that I will, for the first time in the last 10 plus years, have a full all AMD rig. And I'm looking forward to that. Just not happy that we didn't see any sort of performance comparison, even relative performance, don't have to put FPS numbers on it, against the competition. So I guess about a month and a half is what we have to wait to find out, because if they're available December 13th, you know the embargo would be somewhere right around that time. All right, guys, thanks for watching. As it sounds like I'm just ripping nasty ones right here in this. What do you guys think? Sound off down below. I'm really interested to see if this keynote was enough to incentivize you or entice you to go Team Red, or if it's just too much uncertainty.